Elena Castillo stood in her barren front yard, squinting against the harsh Arizona sun. The parched, regulation-perfect gravel landscape stretched before her like a miniature desert, exactly as the Saguaro Heights HOA mandated. It was, by their standards, the epitome of desert-appropriate landscaping. To Elena, it was a monument to ecological ignorance and aesthetic bankruptcy. A renowned botanist specializing in desert ecosystems, Elena had moved to Saguaro Heights 6 months ago for its proximity to the university where she accepted a prestigious research position. The southwestern-style home had seemed perfect, with its adobe walls and spacious yard. What she hadn't fully comprehended was the iron grip of the Homeowners Association and its draconian landscaping restrictions. Water conservation, they claimed, yet their bylaws mandated vast stretches of decorative gravel that created heat islands and prohibited the native plants that had evolved over millennia to thrive in this environment. Elena brushed a strand of dark hair from her face as she knelt to examine the soil beneath the rocks. Contrary to popular belief, the desert wasn't dead. It was teeming with life, waiting for the right conditions, and she had the knowledge to create those conditions. Her phone buzzed with a calendar notification. HOA meeting, 7:00 p.m., perfect timing. After 4 months of meticulous research and planning, Elena was ready to propose her alternative landscape design, one that would be both beautiful and ecologically sound. What Elena didn't know as she rehearsed her presentation that afternoon was that Richard Thornton, the HOA president, had already caught wind of her plan, and as the sun set over Saguaro Heights, painting the gravel yards in shades of amber and gold, Richard was making calls to ensure Elena's proposal would never take root. The Saguaro Heights Community Center buzzed with the low murmur of 30 or so homeowners, an unusually large turnout for a monthly HOA meeting. Elena noticed the whispers and glances as she took a seat in the back row, her presentation folder clutched in her hands. Richard Thornton, a retired insurance executive with a perpetual tan and artificially white teeth, called the meeting to order precisely at 7. He moved efficiently through the standard agenda: treasury reports, upcoming community events, and complaints about a teenager's basketball hoop. When it was finally time for new business, Elena raised her hand. Richard's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ah, Dr. Castillo wishes to speak. I should note that proposals requiring bylaw amendments must be submitted in writing 30 days in advance per Section 5.3 of our HOA Charter." Elena felt her cheeks flush but kept her voice steady. "I'm aware of the bylaws, Mr. Thornton. I submitted my proposal 34 days ago. I have the certified mail receipt and your assistant's signature confirming delivery." She approached the front table, handing copies of her receipt to each board member. The room grew quiet, tension humming in the air. "It seems there's been a clerical error," Richard said, not missing a beat. "We'll need to review this at next month's meeting." "With respect," Elena replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. Section 5.3 also states that if a properly submitted proposal is omitted from the agenda, the homeowner may still present at the current meeting, with voting to occur the following month. A murmur rippled through the audience. Elena hadn't just studied desert botany. She'd memorized every word of the HOA bylaws. Richard's jaw tightened. "Very well. You have 5 minutes." Elena distributed her meticulously prepared packets, containing before and after renderings, water usage projections, heat reduction statistics, and a comprehensive plant list of native species. She connected her laptop to the projector and launched into her presentation. "What I'm proposing isn't just aesthetically superior," she explained, showing side-by-side comparisons. "It will reduce ambient temperatures around our homes by up to 15 degrees in summer, cut water usage by 60% compared to traditional lawns, and create habitat for native pollinators that are crucial to our ecosystem." As she spoke, Elena noticed something unexpected. People were engaged. Heads nodded. Questions were asked. Even a couple of board members seemed interested. Everyone except Richard, whose expression had hardened into granite. "Thank you, Dr. Castillo," he said when her time was up. "While this is creative, I'll remind everyone that our current landscaping guidelines were established to maintain property values and community standards. We'll review this proposal next month as required, but I wouldn't recommend anyone get their hopes up for radical changes. As the meeting adjourned, 3 neighbors approached Elena with questions and encouragement, but as they filtered out of the community center, she overheard Richard speaking to Vernon Miller, another board member. "Find me a way to shut this down. We start letting people plant whatever they want, and this place turns into a jungle. Next thing you know, property values tank, and we're all underwater on our mortgages." Elena drove home under a canopy of stars, equal parts hopeful and uneasy. She'd expected resistance, but not outright hostility. What she didn't yet understand was that her garden proposal threatens something far more precious to Richard Thornton than property values: his control. Elena couldn't wait a month for the next meeting. Arizona's planting season was now, and every day of delay meant another day of excessive water consumption and lost opportunity. So she decided on a modest first step, one that technically didn't violate any HOA rules. The bylaws specified front yard restrictions, but were notably vaguer about side yards, especially those not visible from the street. The narrow strip of land between Elena's house and her fence fell into this gray area. Before sunrise on Saturday, Elena began work on her test plot. She carefully removed the decorative gravel, revealing the hard-packed earth beneath. She amended the soil with compost, installed a drip irrigation system that would deliver precise amounts of water directly to the plant's roots, and began planting desert marigold, penstemons, desert lupine, and several varieties of native buckwheat. By Sunday evening, the transformation was complete. Though small, the garden strip was a riot of colors and textures that would bloom in succession throughout the year. Elena installed small educational markers beside each plant species, a professional touch that reflected her academic background. Word spread quickly. Neighbors happened to walk by, curiosity drawing them to Elena's side yard. She welcomed each visitor with enthusiasm, explaining the benefits of each plant and the overall design principles. "These plants evolved here," she explained to Maria Gonzalez from 2 doors down. "They've developed amazing strategies for desert survival. See how the leaves are small and silvery. That reduces water loss, and these deep roots tap into moisture far below the surface." Maria looked genuinely impressed. "And they're so beautiful. I had no idea desert plants could look like this." By Wednesday, Elena had given impromptu tours to 15 neighbors. By Friday, that number had doubled. People were taking photos, asking questions about specific plants, discussing water bills. The unexpected popularity of Elena's modest garden didn't go unnoticed. Friday afternoon, as she was demonstrating proper pruning techniques to a small group of interested neighbors, a white Tesla pulled up to the curb. Richard Thornton stepped out, his face set in what Elena had come to think of as his official disapproval expression. He walked directly to Elena, barely acknowledging the others. "Dr. Castillo, I've received reports of unauthorized landscaping on your property." Elena stood, brushing soil from her hands. "Good afternoon, Mr. Thornton. I'd be happy to show you what I've done. There's no need. All exterior modifications require prior board approval. Section 7.2. Elena had anticipated this. Section 7.2 specifically addresses visible from the street modifications. This area is not visible from the street and therefore falls under Section 7.4, which allows for minor landscape improvements not affecting drainage or overall community aesthetic. Richard's eyes narrowed. "That's subject to interpretation." "Everything is subject to interpretation," Elena replied evenly. "I've documented the existing drainage patterns and can demonstrate that my garden improves rather than impedes proper water flow. As for aesthetics, perhaps you should ask my neighbors their opinion." Richard glanced at the small crowd that had gathered. All homeowners, all voters in HOA elections. His political instincts kicked in. "We'll discuss this at next week's meeting," he said before turning on his heel and walking back to his car. What Richard didn't see was Vernon Miller, his most loyal board ally, lingering behind to ask Elena about installing something similar in his own side yard. The seeds of rebellion were germinating faster than anyone had anticipated. The certified letter arrived on Monday morning, its official appearance, an urgent notice stamp designed to intimidate. Elena opened it at her kitchen table, already suspecting its contents. Notice of violation. Dear Dr. Castillo, it has come to the attention of the Saguaro Heights Homeowners Association that unauthorized landscape modifications have been made to your property at 4287 Ocotillo Lane. These modifications are in direct violation of covenants, conditions and restrictions, CC and Rs, Section 7.2. You are hereby ordered to restore the property to its approved condition within 72 hours. Failure to comply will result in an initial fine of $150, daily fines of $50 thereafter, possible legal action to enforce compliance. The association reserves the right to enter the property and restore compliance at the homeowner's expense should violations persist beyond 10 days. Sincerely, Richard Thornton, Board President, Saguaro Heights HOA. Elena had expected this, but the aggressive tone still made her hands shake with anger. What she hadn't expected was the second letter that arrived that afternoon, this one from the city's Water Conservation Department. Dear Dr. Castillo, thank you for your application to the Xeriscaping Incentive Program. We are pleased to inform you that your project has been approved for the maximum rebate of $2,000 upon completion and inspection. Your leadership in water conservation is commendable. Our department would like to feature your property in our upcoming Desert Smart public education campaign, with your permission. Additionally, as your project qualifies as a demonstration garden with educational components, you may be eligible for additional grant funding through our partnership with the University Botanical Research Center. Please contact our office to schedule an initial documentation visit. Sincerely, James Waterston, Director, Water Conservation Department. Elena smiled as she read the second letter. She'd applied for the rebate program weeks ago but hadn't expected such an enthusiastic response. The timing couldn't have been better. That evening, she composed 2 responses. The first was to Richard, citing specific provisions of Arizona state law that superseded HOA regulations when it came to water conservation measures. She attached copies of the city's letter, the relevant statutes, and a 2023 state Supreme Court case that had ruled in favor of homeowners implementing water-saving landscapes over HOA objections. The second response was to James Waterston, accepting the feature in the Desert Smart campaign and inquiring about the additional grant funding. She was careful to copy the entire HOA board on both emails. The next day, Elena began work on expanding her garden to the entire side yard. If Richard wanted a fight, she would give him one, but she would fight on the solid ground of legal precedent, scientific evidence, and growing community support. What she didn't know was that Richard had his own plan brewing. If he couldn't stop her through HOA regulations, he would find another way. After all, he hadn't maintained control of Saguaro Heights for 8 years by playing fair. Elena arrived home from the university to find a city vehicle parked outside her house and a man in a khaki uniform examining her side yard garden. Her heart sank. Had Richard found a way to involve city code enforcement? Dr. Castillo, the man called as she approached. I'm Dave Rendon from the Water Conservation Department. James Waterston sent me to document your project for the rebate program. Hope you don't mind me starting without you. Relief washed over her. Not at all. Would you like me to show you around? For the next hour, Elena guided Dave through her garden, explaining her design principles and future plans. He took photos, measurements, and soil samples, clearly impressed with her work. This is exactly the kind of project we want to showcase, he said as they finished the tour. The educational components are particularly valuable. Too many people think desert landscaping means just cactus and rocks. As Dave was packing up his equipment, a group of neighbors approached, 5 of them led by Maria Gonzalez. Elena had been giving Maria informal gardening lessons, and she'd become an enthusiastic advocate. Elena, we've been talking, Maria said, her expression serious but excited. We want to do this too, not just side yards, front yards. Elena looked at the determined faces before her. That would require changing the HOA bylaws. Richard will fight it every step of the way. We know, said Carl Peterson, a retired architect who lived across the street. That's why we're organizing. 15 households so far. We've been researching the process for forcing a special meeting to amend the CC and Rs. Dave from Water Conservation perked up. If you're talking about a neighborhood-wide initiative, the city might be able to help. We have community grants available for multi-property xeriscaping projects. The conversation continued long after Dave left, moving to Elena's backyard patio as the desert sunset painted the sky in spectacular oranges and purples. Plans were made, strategies discussed, allies identified among the residents. A grassroots movement was taking shape. What they didn't notice was Vernon Miller's wife taking photos of their gathering from a second-story window of the house next door, or the text message she sent to Richard Thornton shortly after. Emergency. Castillo is organizing homeowners. At least 5 families involved, planning to change bylaws. Richard's response was immediate. Document everything. Names, dates, times. Board meeting tomorrow, 7 a.m. My house. The next morning, as Elena was leaving for work, she found a second violation notice taped to her door. This one cited a rarely enforced noise ordinance and unauthorized gatherings affecting community tranquility. The fine was $250. The battle lines were now clearly drawn, and both sides were digging in. Elena stared at the latest notice in disbelief. Unauthorized gatherings. It was a transparent attempt at intimidation, and a clumsy one at that. She photographed the notice and sent it to her growing group of allies via their newly established group chat, along with a message. They're getting desperate. Keep documenting everything. The response was immediate and supportive, but Elena couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Richard wouldn't make such an obviously unenforceable move unless he had something else planned. Her suspicions were confirmed that afternoon when she received an email from James Waterston at the Water Conservation Department. Dr. Castillo, I regret to inform you that we've received a formal complaint regarding potential permit violations at your property. While our initial assessment found no issues, we are required to conduct a follow-up inspection before proceeding with the rebate program or educational campaign. Additionally, I should make you aware that Mr. Richard Thornton, identifying himself as your HOA president, has contacted our department expressing concerns about the impact of your project on the community's drainage infrastructure. I remain supportive of your efforts, but wanted to give you advance notice of these developments. James. Richard was clearly pulling strings and calling in favors. Elena had anticipated bureaucratic resistance, but hadn't expected Richard to take the fight to external agencies. She needed help, professional help. That evening, she called her colleague Dr. Ramesh Patel, a hydrologist who specialized in urban water systems. Ramesh, I hate to ask, but would you be willing to conduct an official assessment of my garden project? I need to document that it's actually improving drainage, not harming it. For you, Elena? Of course. I've been following your battle with this HOA tyrant. Half the faculty has. We're rooting for you. The next day was Saturday, and as Ramesh conducted his assessment, neighbors began to gather. What started as casual observation evolved into an impromptu community meeting right there on Elena's driveway. Someone brought folding chairs. Someone else arrived with a cooler of cold drinks. Maria Gonzalez distributed a petition to force a special meeting for bylaw amendments. Then, around noon, something unexpected happened. A sleek black SUV pulled up, and a woman in business attire stepped out, surveying the scene with evident interest. Dr. Castillo, she called, approaching Elena. I'm Sofia Reyes, environmental reporter for the Arizona Republic. I received an interesting tip about a neighborhood revolution of sorts. Mind if I ask a few questions? Elena glanced around, wondering who had contacted the press. The slight smile on Carl Peterson's face gave him away. For the next hour, Sophia interviewed Elena, Ramesh, and several neighbors. She took photos of the garden, the gathering, and the violation notices. Elena provided copies of her correspondence with the HOA and the Water Conservation Department. This is more than a neighborhood dispute, Sophia said as she prepared to leave. It's about climate adaptation, water policy, and property rights. Expect this to run next week, likely front page of the regional section. As Sophia drove away, Maria approached Elena with the petition. We did it, she said, her voice hushed with disbelief. 63 signatures. That's over 50% of homeowners. According to the bylaws, the board must call a special meeting within 30 days. A cheer went up from the gathered neighbors. It was a significant victory, but Elena's celebration was tempered by worry. Richard wouldn't take this lying down, and they still had to win the actual vote to change the landscaping restrictions. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Vernon Miller. Richard is calling emergency board meeting tonight, planning to change petition requirements retroactively. They're scared. I might have access to some helpful documents. Meet me at Catalina Coffee, 9 p.m. Elena showed the message to her core group of allies. It could be a trap, Carl warned. Or it could be exactly what we need, Maria countered. Vernon's always seemed like Richard's puppet, but he's been asking questions about the garden. People can surprise you. Elena made her decision. I'll meet him, but not alone. Who's coming with me? 5 hands went up immediately. The revolution had its lieutenants now, and they would face whatever came next together. Catalina Coffee was nearly empty at 9 p.m. Just a few students from the nearby university hunched over laptops in the corners. Elena and Carl arrived together, ordered teas they didn't want, and waited. Vernon Miller arrived at 9:15, looking nervous and carrying a manila folder. He slid into the booth across from them without ordering. I don't have much time, he said, his voice low. Richard can't know I'm here. Why are you helping us, Vernon? Elena asked directly. You supported Richard on every vote for years. Vernon's face tightened. Because I'm sick of being a hypocrite. I've wanted to change my own landscaping for 3 years, but I was afraid of crossing Richard. The man holds grudges and has friends in every city department. Cross him, and suddenly your building permit applications get lost or your property tax assessment goes up. He pushed the folder across the table, but there are lines even Richard shouldn't cross. Inside the folder was a printed email chain between Richard and a private investigator dated 6 months earlier. The PI had been hired to dig up dirt on a previous homeowner who had challenged Richard's authority, a woman named Gabriela Lopez who had wanted to install solar panels before the HOA allowed them. The emails detailed how the PI had found a minor discrepancy in Lopez's mortgage application from years earlier. Richard had used this information to pressure her into withdrawing her proposal and eventually selling her house. There's more, Vernon said. Financial records showing HOA funds used for Richard's personal legal issues. Selective enforcement of violations against his critics. And this. He pulled out another document, an invoice from a landscaping company for work on Richard's property, paid with HOA maintenance funds. Why now? Carl asked. Why didn't you speak up before? Vernon looked down. Cowardice, mostly. But after seeing what Elena created, something beautiful that actually helps our environment, and watching how Richard responded with pure spite, I couldn't stay silent anymore. The 3 of them spent the next hour developing a strategy. With Vernon's documents and inside information about the emergency board meeting, they could not only block Richard's attempt to change the petition rules, but potentially remove him from the board entirely. As they were preparing to leave, Vernon's phone buzzed. His face went pale as he read the message. Richard knows I'm not home. Says he came by to drop off some board documents and my wife told him I was out. He looked up, panic in his eyes. He's asking where I am. Tell them you're at the hospital, Elena suggested quickly. Family emergency. You'll explain tomorrow. Vernon nodded and typed the response. I need to go. Use those documents carefully. Richard has friends in high places. After Vernon left, Elena and Carl lingered, reviewing the materials and refining their plan. The special meeting would happen in 2 weeks. They needed to be thoroughly prepared. As they finally stepped outside, the night air felt different, heavy with moisture and electricity. In the distance, lightning illuminated the mountains. Monsoon's coming early this year, Carl observed. Elena smiled. Perfect timing for new gardens. The next morning, Elena woke to the rare sound of rain pattering on her roof and the even rarer pain of an email notification at 5:30 a.m. It was from Sophia Reyes at the Arizona Republic. Elena, my editor fast-tracked your story. It's running tomorrow. Front page main section, not just regional. The angle shifted after my background research turned up some interesting connections between Richard Thornton and the city planning commissioner. Also, I received an anonymous package of documents last night that you should know about. Can we meet today? Sophia. Elena stared at her phone in disbelief, then looked out at the rain transforming the desert. Someone, almost certainly Vernon, had taken an even bigger risk than showing her the documents. The monsoon had arrived in more ways than one. The Salguero Heights Community Center had never been so packed. Folding chairs filled every available space, with latecomers standing along the walls. The special meeting to vote on amending the landscaping bylaws had drawn nearly every homeowner in the community. The past 2 weeks had been a whirlwind. Sophia Rice's front-page expose in the Arizona Republic had sent shockwaves through not just Salguero Heights, but HOA communities across the state. The article detailed Richard's abuse of power, financial improprieties, and conflicts of interest, including his brother-in-law's ownership stake in the very landscaping company that maintained the community's gravel yards. 3 board members had resigned immediately after the story broke. Richard had issued a blustering denial, threatening lawsuits against the newspaper and disloyal community members. But the damage was done. The city had launched an investigation into the financial irregularities, and the Water Conservation Department had fast-tracked approval for Elena's demonstration garden. Most significantly, Vernon Miller had stepped forward publicly, providing a sworn statement about Richard's intimidation tactics and misuse of HOA funds. The personal cost had been high. His wife had moved out temporarily, unable to handle the community scrutiny, but Vernon stood firm. Now, as Elena looked around the crowded room, she felt a complex mixture of emotions: pride in what she and her neighbors had accomplished, vindication for her scientific approach to desert landscaping, but also a certain sadness that the community had to experience such turmoil to make progress. The meeting was being chaired by Barbara Chin, the only remaining board member not implicated in Richard's schemes. Richard himself was conspicuously absent. Before we proceed to the vote, Barbara announced, "I want to acknowledge what our community has been through. Regardless of where you stand on the landscaping issue, I think we can all agree that transparency and integrity in HOA governance are non-negotiable." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. With that said, we have before us Proposal 23-7, which would amend our CC and Rs to allow and encourage native plant xeriscaping in both front and side yards, with appropriate guidelines to ensure visual cohesion and property value protection. Elena had worked closely with Carl Maria, and surprisingly Vernon, to craft guidelines that would allow for creativity and ecological benefits while maintaining the community's aesthetic appeal. The proposal included a phase and period, design resources, and even a community seed and cutting exchange program to help homeowners share successful plants. Dr. Castillo, would you like to make any final remarks before we vote? Barbara asked. Elena stood, surveying the faces of her neighbors, some now friends, some still skeptical, but all engaged in a way they hadn't been before. What began as my personal frustration with water-wasting landscaping rules has become something much more important, she began. This isn't just about what plants we can put in our yards. It's about acknowledging that we live in a desert with finite resources. It's about creating living spaces that connect us to this unique ecosystem rather than fighting against it. She gestured toward the windows, where new growth from the recent monsoon rains had transformed the desert beyond the subdivision. The native plants I've proposed don't just save water. They create habitat for pollinators, reduce ambient temperatures, prevent erosion, and yes, they're beautiful in a way that reflects the true character of Arizona. But most importantly, they connect us to this place we've all chosen to call home. Elena paused, looking directly at a few of the homeowners who have been most resistant to change. I understand change can be uncomfortable. That's why our proposal includes a 3-year transition period, design assistance, and cost-sharing options. No one will be forced to tear out their current landscaping immediately. This is about creating choices and moving forward together as a community that values both aesthetics and sustainability. The vote that followed wasn't even close. 87 in favor, 14 opposed, 5 abstentions. The Saguaro Heights CC and Rs would be amended to allow native plant xeriscaping. As people filed out after the meeting, many stopped to congratulate Elena or ask questions about specific plants. The energy in the room was palpably different from the tense HOA meetings of the past. There was excitement, engagement, even joy. 3 months later, Elena stood in her front yard, now a thriving showcase of desert flora. Desert marigolds, penstemons, and buckwheats created waves of color among the structural elements of agaves and cacti. A small mesquite tree provided dappled shade for a bench where she often sat in the evenings, watching hummingbirds and butterflies visit the flowers. The transformation of Saguaro Heights was well underway. 12 homes had already converted their landscaping, with 15 more in various stages of planning. The Water Conservation Department had featured the community in a statewide campaign, and 3 neighboring HOAs had requested Elena's guidance in updating their own regulations. Richard Thornton had sold his house and moved away, facing potential legal consequences for the financial improprieties uncovered during the controversy. The new HOA board, which included Vernon Miller, Maria Gonzalez, and 2 other reform-minded residents, had implemented transparency measures and term limits. As Elena watered a newly planted penstemon, Barbara Chen walked by with her dog. "The city council is considering a new ordinance," Barbara called out. "They're using our guidelines as a model for water conservation landscaping throughout the county." Elena smiled. "From little seeds." "Exactly," Barbara replied. "By the way, have you seen today's paper? You might want to pick one up." Later that evening, Elena sat on her bench, reading the headline Barbara had alluded to: "State Legislature Considers Right to Xeriscape Bill, Inspired by Saguaro Heights Revolution." A hummingbird darted among her penstemons, its wings catching the last golden light of sunset. From somewhere down the street came the sound of laughter, a neighborhood gathering at the Gonzalez's house, where another new garden was taking root. Elena closed her eyes and breathed in the subtle fragrance of desert lavender. What had begun as a lonely stand against bureaucratic absurdity had blossomed into something far more significant than she could have imagined. A true community, connected to each other and to the land they shared. In the end, her garden had grown more than plants. It had grown a movement. The end.